Okay, so we'll go ahead and open it up. First hand I see, oh,
Let me see
sorry,
if
go
I
ahead.
can, is this working?
It barely works, but it
Barely
does
works.
a little bit.
Okay.
But I can repeat the question too.
One of the biggest users of water in the U.S., as the presenters described, is agriculture. Is it only the politics that prevents reducing that amount of water that goes into, and a lot of it get wasted? You travel to some place like Israel, they grow a lot of food, a lot of irrigation, but significantly less water. So what's holding us up to reduce the water consumption in agriculture?
Did you see the last slide? That big elephant? So you have a system, we have been an agricultural nation. The issue really is the introduction and cost of more efficient irrigation practices. A lot of those irrigation practices are being imported actually from Israel. The drip irrigation, you are seeing the numbers come down. If you look at Texas, in the next 20 years, they see irrigation coming down by 18%. Some of that is because agricultural crops are moving elsewhere, but some of it is just using better techniques. But it really is a function of cost, the fragmentation of farming. As we move to mega farms, you can do things like that. And the fact that we've been a rural nation. So it really is, it rains, you use your groundwater. In the state of Texas, we're a rural capture state, so we can go get our own well and we can irrigate whatever we want to irrigate without being regulated. So it is just the system, it is the cost, it is the lobbyists, and it really is sometimes just the silo effect and how fragmented policymaking is.
And let me follow up with one. The agricultural interests have a disproportionate political gravitas in this country, primarily because of the structure of the states. And the great example is ethanol. I mean, ethanol makes no sense whatsoever that we have any ethanol program. But by the way, there's an Iowa presidential primary every 4 years. And so the fact that Iowa has, 2 senators, and the same number of senators that New York has, it's part of our historical structure of our government that gives agriculture a disproportionate political clout.
And just a side note on that, not so much related to water supply, but in terms of water quality, both major statutes I spoke of in 72 and 87 explicitly exempt agricultural runoff. Yes.
This is a suggestion. We had been looking into the water treatment for ages, and we are looking for the ultimate solutions. But maybe we ought to look into the case-specific solutions. The point in this case, there are desalination plants in the world built integrating with the power generation, power plant, waste heat utilization. In the South Texas, there's a lot of waste heat being wasted. So we could possibly, with the help of nanotechnology, find a mini treatment system, desal plant that would help both the industry in getting rid of their wastewater and the waste heat using economics-based desal unit. And personally, I have done a study about 10 years ago, and it's site-specific, but it does work. But this nanotechnology will have to enable it.
Okay, so I'm not sure if everybody heard that, but it's just to summarize, it sounds like you were suggesting site-specific solutions, combining energy and desal, energy production, waste heat, desal, kind of in a co-located type of approach, and being more localized and site-specific.
Utilizing nanotechnology.
Using nanotechnology. Okay, great. Another question over there.
Yes.
The microphone is working, they can pick it up.
Okay.
Okay. As one of your slides showed, kind of a worst-case scenario for all of our future is what California has been through, the West Coast has been through in the last 5 to 10 years. I guess a two-part question, and from your expert opinions, did they handle their short-term challenges in the way they should have? And from a longer-term perspective, what should they be doing that perhaps they're not yet to try and address their regional issue that they've suffered through so badly?
I have some thoughts on that too.
Well, I don't want to dominate here, but you remember there's that movie about water in California. Problem with California is you've got a lot of politics within the state of California. You've got your water in the north, you've got it's drier in the south, you've got the whole issue of the bay, agriculture where perhaps using so much groundwater it shouldn't be. So the politics of water in California almost determine the outcome. It took 12 years for the Carlsbad desal plant to be piloted, built, accepted. The lawsuits were just legend. But now San Diego is going to have access to desalination, but 12 years in the making. So what do you do in the face of a massive drought? Conservation, a lot of regulation about conservation, but it really is all incremental. The problems of California and water go back historically, and Michael, you can address that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I pay attention to California water issues a little bit, obviously, because I'm based here, but the main points I would say is on the short term, they did some pretty draconian regulations related to turf management. They were actually paying people to pull out turf and landscaping. Their water planning structure is nowhere near as far along as Texas is. Texas has 16 regions in the state. It's a ground-up, grassroots, bottom-up planning process where all the different regions plan their water issues, identify their deficit, and figure out what they're going to do, and it becomes part of a state water plan. There's now low-interest financing to implement those projects. The one big deficit that Texas has is that we don't really connect groundwater and surface water in that planning process. California doesn't have any sort of structure that I can tell, correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of groundwater regulation, and they're very far behind in terms of any kind of regional or state level planning. They're basically just a bunch of people fighting over what they can get to. So anyway, that's my little soapbox. Go ahead, next question. Yes?
Yes, I have the...
Oh, way in the back.
Can you hear me up there? Is this working?
I think it's picking up on the tape.
Okay, I just wanted to follow up on the comments made by the Rice professor about putting small particles on top of the filter medium and how it would help in the removal or lack of placement of contaminants. Indeed, this has been done and it is commercialized by a Scottish firm that are now in the stages of wanting to introduce it to the USA. They have a very special way of, they start with a certain glass and they treat it with whatever it is to create these small particles, and they talk about very high efficiencies and effective filtration. I would like to see the two people there at the end of the table and get their business cards so I can tell them more about it in detail.
Okay. Any other?
My comment.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay. We got the roving microphone because we're trying to pick up the questions on the videotape. So we're going to go with.
This is mainly for Professor Michael. Yeah, so do you believe that more of a curriculum based on water saving engineering would be something that we could look at for the future generations? Because, you know, as we spoke today, this isn't a problem you fix today. This is a problem that's going to go on for the future. Thank you.
I really appreciate that question. The question surrounds the idea of with the problem of water now, and it's not just nanotechnology as an approach, but it's the idea of how do we as engineers and scientists as well tackle this problem of removing what shouldn't be in water. Okay? And part of it is happening already as far as curriculum is concerned, as it inserts itself. And I think it depends on the angle, I think, and the perspective of the direction that one wants to take in terms of education. From a practical point of view, from a problem point of view, it's very identifiable. And it's one of these grand challenges in the 21st century. The National Academies of Engineering came out with the 10 grand challenges a couple of years ago, and has put that up as a beacon for scientists and engineers to really try to tackle that problem in addition to population growth and energy, et cetera. As far as how that boils down to the curriculum level, the undergraduate degree and the graduate degree, I would say two things. Is at the graduate degree level, that is already happening. Even in my own research group, I have graduate students working on problems that relate to cleaning water using nanoparticles, this and that, to do catalysis, adsorption, et cetera. And by way of doing those particular projects successfully, then they get their eventual PhD. At the undergraduate level, the question then becomes how much of the water issues does one want to teach outside of the traditional environmental engineering curriculum? And I think that's a good question to ask broadly amongst other disciplines. And so as a chair of my own department, the Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering, we don't have a course on water. Water for us is an application point of chemical engineering principles, but certainly it does show up in the various classes of thermodynamics, transport, and kinetics. And so to wrap my remarks up there is that the fundamentals that are specific to a particular major provides students and that strong sense of fundamental knowledge that can attack that problem in their own way. We can't know all. I think that would be my last point as well. It's hard to know everything about water. But by educating folks steeped in the fundamentals of a particular major and teaming up with other folks, that presents a very well integrated approach to tackle the water problem, as you might say. Okay. But that's a great comment that you raised. Thank you.
Okay, who has the microphone next? There we go.
So I'm unfortunately going to go back to California. It's a related but slightly separate question, which is, so as an uneducated but interested observer, when I look at California, I do realize, like a lot of you are saying, there are some things that are very unique to California in terms of its policies and its posture. But I also wonder if there are things about California that really apply broadly to lots of places, and California is just the leading edge of the problem. As, for example, the choice between rural versus urban water consumption, farming versus, water to drink versus water to eat. So, do we farm crops? Land use policies in terms of how we allocate water, drought management, as in, is it more important to keep reservoirs stocked with water to handle the cities, or versus, letting our almond crops die? And more water intensive versus less water intensive crops, almonds versus, carrots. So what I wonder is whether California is truly altogether the exception. So we look at that and say, well, that's just California. That'll not happen to anyone. Or whether really California is the canary in the coal mine, saying, watch out, this could happen to everyone else if corrective measures are not taken, if we don't follow the same path.
I mean, I'll just weigh in while the microphone's being transferred. The water planning, I guess I have two thoughts. Water planning is fundamentally an exercise where you look at the drought of record, the longest period of drought or dry period, and you try to assess what the consumption would be over that same period in the future if that drought of record were to reoccur. And so our drought of record is in the 50s. 5 or 6 years of like zero precipitation, basically. If you go back into the geologic record, there are periods of drought in this part of Pangaea that were a lot longer than that. So that's the first point, is that we only plan for what we can plan for. Flooding in this city is based on a 1% event. So if you live in the 1% event storm, that means it's a 1% event every year that you will flood, 1% chance every year that you'll flood. That means in the life of a 30-year mortgage, you have a 26% chance of flooding. Anyway, that's the first thing. The second thing is that we live in a free market system. Property rights, individual rights, community rights are all balanced, and water is a commodity to a large degree, right? So we use the economic system and the free market system, in quotes, to allocate that resource. It's not always optimal, but that's how we do it.
Yes, two questions. One is, I'm wondering about the percentages of surface water and the percentages of groundwater that are used in the United States. And I ask that question because I know there are a lot of depleting aquifers throughout the country, agricultural aquifers like the Ogala aquifers in West Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, on up, and other places that are drastically being reduced and changing agricultural practices all along. And I'd like to know a little bit more about that area. The second is the movement of water. As you're pointing out, there are places that have a lot of water and there are places that don't have a lot of water. And there have been schemes that have been used in the past, like California, the movement of water from the north down to the south. But I've even heard of schemes like bringing melting icebergs into places and using water from icebergs. I've also heard about movement of water from northern Canada, moving that on down to places in the U.S. And then we had even in Texas, Boone Pickens attempted a few years ago to move aquifer water from West Texas or parts of West Texas to the metropolitan area. And I'd like a comment on both of those 2 points.
Let me comment on the conveyance. There have been a lot of schemes. Las Vegas, when Pat Mulroy was up there, thought about whether they're not able to divert the Green River or part of the Mississippi to get water down. Boone Pickens, yes, he did do the conservation district, all of those water rights. The fundamental problem with water, moving water is energy intensive. Water is very, very heavy. So the reason why the Boone Pickens project did not go forward was really, he was going to use wind power, so a lot of it was all sustainable, but fundamentally, the cost to get the water long distances really makes it very, very difficult. You've also got rights of way, you've got your permitting, so it's not kind of like you can just lay a gas line and your gas is going down. Water has to be pumped. Pumped means energy intensity. So 21% of all the energy consumed in California, 21% of all the energy consumed in California is pumping water around that state. So the statistics and how interconnected water and energy is pretty tremendous. So lots of schemes, but it all comes down to people want water where it isn't. And the only way you can get water, if you aren't at the coast, is you've got to move it or use what you've got better.
The state of Texas has a water plan that was adopted and published in the 1930s or 40s that contemplated piping Mississippi River water over here.
You know, in this region, we are well down the road of getting off groundwater and going to surface water. And I don't know exactly, I think by 2020 we're supposed to be completely off of it or something. But it is a really interesting case study and a great governance success. And we set up subsidence district, I guess in the 70s or something like that, and began a long-term plan of getting off of groundwater and going to surface water. A guy named Jim Box, Mr. Misher Sr. was very active in that. And it was one of those sort of, really far-reaching things that government actually got right in this region, and more so than a lot of other places.
This is for the panel. Isn't it true that 70% of the water in the world is used for agriculture? 20% is used in industry, and 10% is used in drinking water. So when it comes to irrigation, you need fresh, clean, cheap water. It's impossible to irrigate, feed cattle without cheap water. So that's where our water needs to be cheap. Drinking water we can charge. The area that I see the biggest advantage in is industrial water reuse. Why does this cooling tower here in this building use fresh water, and they use it for 3 months, and then they blow it down, they blow it out? They could treat that water and reuse it. I think the industry that is the prime for saving water internationally immediately is industrial water. What is your opinion on this?
Absolutely disagree. Yes, they can do better, but if we're looking for savings, it's kind of like the industrial complex has in many, many respects already gone to reuse because it's cheaper, it's point of use, and that reuse and recycling is in fact happening more than people realize. It's easy to point to the industrial complex and say, you should pay more, and maybe if we had pricing mechanisms, which are more tranche mechanisms, which are based on volumetric use, and the more you use, the more you get charged. So we can look at things like pricing, but across the board. But the low-hanging fruit is domestic reuse. The low-hanging fruit is better irrigation techniques. Your incremental reuse that you're going to get at the industrial sector is not as large as you think it is, and I think that focusing attention there is one of those elephants in the room because it makes people look at that squirrel and not look at the real abusers of water and focus on those elements, which are, I think, more low-hanging fruit. Tom, do you want to give me some backup here?
I would agree.
Yeah.
And actually in industry users, they actually prefer to use wastewater, reuse water, actually for their processes because it's higher quality. And they have to use less polishing. So if you look at California, I know California's getting picked on, and the elephant in that room is water rights, actually. That's the big elephant. But in California, industry is increasingly using reuse from wastewater plants, and that is saving the potable water for domestic consumption. So the facts are there.
The other really interesting thing related to the sort of battle between water users relates to the Brazos River. So in 2011, when we were going through our big drought, where the drought map was all red for us, the Brazos River basically went down to a trickle. And guess what happens to be located at the end of the Brazos River, the mouth of the Brazos River? The Dow Chemical Complex, where they make polyethylene and a lot of other products. They have the oldest water right on that river. They have the legal right to a certain volume of that river flow. So they called the state and said, hey guys, you gotta cut people off. We don't have enough water to produce anymore. And that created, pardon my French, a whole shitstorm as municipal users and agricultural users realized they were about to get cut off because of a senior water call.
Real quick, Bill, you had brought up that Dallas County has 6 water plants, and Harris County has quite a number of them. Is it better to focus on the smaller ones and get that technology way up there, or to burden the smaller systems with the albatross of the city of Houston? I mean, and that goes for the engineers in here. Is it easier to build smaller systems that can be scaled up rather than bringing them into a system that's overburdened already and doesn't have the resources to improve those?
Yeah, so I was talking about wastewater treatment plants. And look, there are economies of scale to these things. And there's also, there's a regulatory administrative cost that, that's much higher on these small as a percentage of of the revenue streams that come out. And then from just a regulatory standpoint, trying to run around and make sure that every one of those little plants, trying to make sure that 435 plants are in compliance as opposed to 6 big plants. It's a historical accident, if you will, that we ended up with this, primarily because the city stopped annexing at some point in time, and the only way to create water and sewer system was to create these mud districts, and to a much smaller degree, actually private utility districts that exist kind of toward the northeast of the county. And so these things grew up because people wanted to develop their land, and there wasn't a government that was prepared to extend the service. And so MUDs were created. It's a whole cottage industry now.
Are they having the problem, or is it the cities that's having the problem with the antiquated sewer systems that are leaking?
It's both. And some of these MUDs are 40, 50, 60 years old now. And with all the problems that, say, a city of Houston has with their system, I think the regulators would tell you that they would rather deal with one large entity that had a lot of resources than trying to deal with individual. It doesn't mean that there's not individual MUDs that don't do a much better job than the city of Houston. But my impression from talking to regulators is for every one of those, there's 2 or 3 that, they're having problems with. Especially, people won't realize how many private utility companies are in Harris County that provide, water and sewer to 100 houses or 200 houses or something. And almost none of those things are in compliance at all,
So my question kind of builds on what we just talked about, and it goes back to this elephant in the room that many of you have mentioned, which is the poor efficiency, the amount of leakage and loss we have in the distribution and transport systems, or conversely in the wastewater gathering systems. So I guess I'd be interested in the insights on whether resolving that is primarily a technical problem, whether it's mainly a capital improvement maintenance issue, or should we be looking more at modular systems that eliminate some of the, what I'll call long haul, in order to avoid the amount of loss that we have from some of these systems?
So I think it's political and financial at this point in time. It's the hardest thing to ever kill off is some governmental entity that you create. I mean, because you've got people that are on the board, and you've got lawyers and accountants and all these people that have a vested interest in these little governmental entities continue to exist. And frankly, because Houston didn't annex, nor would it allow the areas outside the city to go incorporate their own municipalities, you have all these sort of crazy jackleg systems that were developed. Trying to get those people to give up those little fiefdoms is very difficult to do. But also, the engineers in the room can tell you, trying to figure out a way now to consolidate all those plants and move that, wastewater into big plants would be very, very capital intensive at this point. I think actually Jim Thompson did a study of that a number of years ago, and the number was like, $20 billion or something. It was a huge amount of money. So you've got both financial and political impediments. I tell you, one of the guys who's really talking about this a lot is Ed Emmett, talking about how ungovernable these areas are. We will have more people in unincorporated Harris County than we have in the city of Houston probably by the end of this decade. If you took unincorporated Harris County and made it its own city, it would be the 2nd largest city in Texas after Houston, and it would be the 5th largest city in the United States after Houston. Just to give you an idea of the scale of the area that's in unincorporated Harris County.
I'm a business professor at Texas Southern University, and about 2 years ago, got into this water arena. I've heard a number of people talking about water as if it's a commodity. And that's why I'm trying to encourage our school to get involved in the water business, because I would argue that water is not a commodity. And the mistake is treating it as a commodity. I heard the gentleman here talk about California being the canary in the mine. I argue that the real canary in the mine is sub-Saharan Africa. Because when you look at all the things that Amanda talked about in terms of forming this perfect storm, you add severe poverty to that equation. And you start to see the real challenges as it relates to technology, the real challenges as it relates to attitudes, and a number of other things that will affect the way water can be used and structured. Plus, you have a large industrial energy producing presence in that part of the world. My question is, if we look, well, as one aside also, I think if we looked at water differently, we would think of it as, we would look at renewable energy differently. If we looked at the true price of water, we would look at renewable being more competitive. Because when you look at energy production, except for wind and solar, most forms of energy are highly water intensive. So I wanted to ask y'all about that, but also I think a lot of opportunities to change people's minds are being missed by not bringing the business professors into this discussion. For example, when I first looked at this issue of water, I found that they were saying exactly what you said, Amanda, that the water isn't where the people are. In order to grow food and water in the future, because it's heavy and can't be moved easily, water will be transported through processed foods. Well, as a business professor, my first thought was invest in food transport. And we aren't looking at this from the long view in terms of what are the other business opportunities, which I think will motivate companies to behave in a way that's different from the way that they're behaving, because there will be more profit and we won't look to them to behave altruistically. But my question is, do you believe that if we looked at water and the true price, and I think the price and cost of water are connected, and I really think in some ways they're opposite sides of the same coin. If we looked at the true price / cost of water, do you think we would see some changes in energy allocations? For example, California is looking at a 30% generation plan where they're going to use renewable, about 33% renewable in their integrated resource planning process. Do you think that we would look at the generation of power very differently, or not just power, but energy very differently, if we looked at the true cost and price of water?
So the issue that everybody has great difficulty talking about is the cost of water and connecting it to the concept of whether or not water is a universal right or water is a commodity. And I think what has occurred, and I think that business professors, and happy to talk to you about this afterwards, with virtual water and some of the models that have been coming out as it associated with water, I think we do have to think about water as a commodity, but as a commodity that everybody has access to or the right to, and that the pricing mechanisms that are put in place guarantee a certain basic quantity of water for basic human need and consumption, and that you price water volumetrically. It's been done in other commodity industries, and what we do know in this country and worldwide is that if you price something, it drives human behavior. And if you price it appropriately, you will see people react and they will value it more if they have to pay for it. One of the saddest things that I've witnessed is some of the highest cost of water in Kenya and Ghana and other places where people are going to water kiosks to buy water because they know they are safe. And they are paying more for that water on a volumetric basis than any place we pay for water through a municipal utility that's delivered in this country. And that is tragic because that disposal income is not there. So the bottom line is water is a commodity, my humble opinion, but we have to price it and make sure that there is a universal right to water that is protected and is priced from that point up.
I think we've hit on it several times, and Bill, you talked about the funding issue. If we don't price it correctly, we're not going to solve these issues we've talked about. We're going to be here in 20, 30, 40 years. There has to be a return on the investment, there has to be profits made, and that has to go back into sustaining our water infrastructure. It's completely underfunded.
I just have one observation. As I live in the Spring Branch area, and Saturday, a couple of weekends ago, I noticed right inside the loop on Old Katy Road, there was a water main going full blast. No one was there. It was pouring out on the concrete. Same thing a couple of blocks up, running perpendicular to North Post Oak, right where the new 610 interchange 290. I called 311 and gave them all the information, and I didn't want to be anonymous. I told them who I was so they wouldn't think it was a crankpot. But I have seen this over and over again addressing the leakage, where there is just water running just rampant in the streets. There is no one around. How on earth does this happen? It had to have been opened by someone, because it's a pipe with nothing on the end. So that's just a comment I have to make. Maybe if you could address responsibility with the water department or construction people or whatever. Maybe there need to be fines if they do this. So.
Well, I spent most of last year talking about this. You know, it's a question of what's the priority of the government, how are they spending the money, where are they putting the people. You know, the city of Houston has a director of education, you know, a whole staff department. City doesn't run any schools, you know, and so it's a question of doing what we expect municipal government and directing the tax dollars and resources to these issues.
Well, with that, that'll have to be the last word. Again, I just really wanted to thank the panel members for coming out and talking, and for all of y'all for attending. Thanks again to the MIT Enterprise Forum Texas for hosting the event. And I guess if you have any wrap-up words.
Some quick closing remarks. Thank you all for coming tonight. I hope you enjoyed the program as much as I did. And I want to thank Michael and Bill and Amanda, Michael, and Jonathan for participating in this program. So thank them very much. And please drive home safely.